What does it mean to live a resilient life? I'm Ryan Mannion. I lost my brother to war and my mom to cancer, and I've learned a lot about myself along the way. Now, as the CEO of Travis Mannion Foundation, I'm on a journey to explore what it means to be resilient against life's many challenges. Join me and some incredible guests as we ask ourselves the hard questions and define what it means to struggle well. So we are kicking it off today with a fan favorite, and you are Mary Katharine Ham. I always say, like, your episodes perform so well for us, and I think it's because of your authenticity, and it doesn't really matter what topic we're talking about, but we just have a natural rhythm to us. And so I love having you on. Welcome back again. And, you're here today actually in your professional context, because I've been thinking a lot about what's happening in our world politically. And I felt like all these things I was thinking and feeling, I'm like, other people have to be feeling this way. And a lot of it is like confusion. There's so much political discourse going on. You don't know what to say and who to say to what to say to who and who to say to what. And so I thought, who better than my good friend Mary Katharine Ham, who is a political commentator, to come on and talk to us a little bit about how to navigate through this really kind of confusing time, which almost seems like if it was written in a movie, you wouldn't believe it.
It does feel like that, doesn't it? Every year of politics news, I think it's not going to feel more like a screenplay this year than it did last year, but it keeps doing that. And as you and I know, Ryan, like that's just kind of life. Sometimes it just goes haywire, and sometimes it goes haywire for a long period of time. And I do feel like we are in a political arc that has been a little unhinged
Yeah.
for quite some time now. I just to give my qualifications to anybody listening, I've been a political commentator for some 20 years, kind of by accident. I was always interested in politics, but I came from a news junkie family. My dad was a newspaper editor. We got 3 or 4 newspapers at the house every day. So I was always in a like I would say like a hyper informed family, but not really a political family. And then I ended up working in newspapers for a while. I grew up in a very liberal town, and I sort of ended up right of center in my philosophies. I saw the government fail people at times. I was skeptical of its power and the way it's used against citizens, and just was wanted to look for different solutions than the one offered in my liberal town, right? So that's kind of my political evolution. As a result, because I grew up with all liberals, I end up communicating well with both sides because I sort of speak both languages. That is how I ended up being a longtime employee of Fox, who was able to become a longtime employee of CNN, and now I'm back at Fox. So you'll see me there during this election season. But I genuinely like to talk to people who think differently than I do. I always have. I think it is enriching. I think it's an important part of being an American citizen, and even a fun part of life if you can do it well with people who will cut you a break. And that's so I'm sort of in the business of trying to help people get there. But it can be really hard. We live in a polarized time. We are an evenly split nation, basically, when it comes to sort of putting yourself in the red or the blue bucket.
Right.
But one of the things I like to tell people is that even though, yes, we are evenly split, red or blue, not everybody's happy to call themselves red or blue, right? They're not all excited to be there because they disagree with a lot of the things on either side, or they don't love the candidate on their side, right? And then the other thing that's important to remember as a result of that is individual people are almost always political hybrids. Like you can find something on which you two agree, uh, often politically, but frankly, even if it's just the Eagles, that's okay too. Like just just find something to connect with your fellow human on aside from those things, and that can be healing as well. So that's kind of where I come at it from, but it's admittedly difficult sometimes.
Well, I think you just brought up something very interesting. As a diehard Eagles fan, it almost feels like this election cycle is like the Eagles versus the Cowboys. And so
Mhm.
if you're an Eagles fan or a Cowboys fan, like there is no finding commonality. Like
Right.
we do not like Cowboys fans do not like us, and there is no middle ground. And I one of the things that we've been talking about and I've been having discussions with people in my life about is, when you talk about an election and a hyper polarized election like we are facing right now, I've noticed that it is how we're trying to figure out how to navigate like landmines of ideologies versus
Right.
actual policy issues. And
Right.
that's where it becomes really complicated. And I was watching a TikTok the other day, and it was like, if you vote for this person, I want nothing to do with you. And that
Yeah.
seems to be some of the stances that are being taken. And, again, I think you can look at things and we can talk a little bit about the role the media plays in all of that. But how do you begin, like, and you do a beautiful job of it. You say, I like to talk to people that fall on a different side than I do, and I like to find that commonality. But how do you even begin to navigate that when it is so polarized right now? I don't know another way to articulate it, but
Yeah. I think a couple things to keep in mind. Also, your analogy is apt because when it comes to the Eagles and Cowboys, the two groups that are in those fan groups really love those teams, and then outside of that, pretty much everyone doesn't, right?
yeah, everybody
It's
hates
like,
us.
right. So it's like that is
Nobody likes
actually
us. We don't care. So,
right, exactly. Well, and that's kind of the electorate, at least at the presidential level right now,
yeah.
right? You've got some super fans on both sides, and then you've got some people who are like, I'm just here trying to make the decision. And I think that's an important part of understanding all of this is that everyone who votes, and actually those who choose not to vote, are all making a decision. And some of them feel like, hey, I'm making a decision between three or four not great options, right? A Republican, a Democrat, maybe a third party, and maybe I don't vote and I vote for the rest of the ticket, right? So we're all kind of in the same place making this decision if you're not a super fan of someone who's on the ballot. Even if you are a super fan, that means, and I try to look at my fellow citizens this way, that's a super engaged person who is interested in politics, who's interested in civic life, right? I don't want to trash that either, although I am not in general a fan of like devoting myself to politicians. And that's not my thing. So I think thinking about it like that can be helpful to people. If you are a super fan, you can think about it this way because understanding that other people have trouble getting to a vote for the person you think is the obvious choice is exactly how you learn to convince people that they could go that way, right? If you think that the choice is obvious, you can't convince anyone of anything, right? So having a bit of empathy and understanding for that, I think is an important part of this. I think keeping your own blood pressure down is important. Uh, now this is a real thing because I consume a lot of political news daily. I have to stay up to date on things. I have to consume so much because I feel like there are a lot of people with different motivations telling me different things, and I want to get to the bottom of the actual story and the actual facts. That happens a lot. You can sort of outsource that to people like me, and we can talk about that because what I do is I choose people I trust to speak to me about the facts. I choose reporters I trust who I know I can trust with the facts. I choose people who have a record of having spoken out and been the weirdo in the room, sometimes at a cost. And
Yeah.
I know that they're willing to shoot straight with me, right? So I have sources in that way. Regular folks should also outsource all of their news gathering to people that they trust, to outlets that they trust. So you don't have to do 24/7 reading the news, right? Because I don't think that's great for you. Um, Focusing on your family is important. Focusing on your faith can really put things in perspective when you're really consumed with stress about how this one particular thing is going to come out. Getting outside is very helpful, right? The joke on the internet is go touch grass, but you actually should go touch grass. And
Ground.
it will.
Yeah.
Just the other day, I was really stressed out and just went for a walk with my kids, dragged them along in a wagon for a couple of blocks. And lo and behold, when I came back and hadn't been in my phone and had been walking around in nature for half an hour, I felt 3 to 4 times better than I had when I was at the house before. So I think those things will make you more able to communicate with other people when this comes to pass, right? So I think that's an important part of it. But yeah, it's admittedly hard to do that when the news is moving as quickly as it is right now.
Do you think that the rise of digital and social media has impacted political discourse in our country?
Yeah, I think it's fairly clear that, look, like I said, I have people I trust, and I take in a lot of news, a lot of it on a place like Twitter or Instagram. If TikTok is your preferred social media, whatever it is, I think there's a lot of evidence that that is driving up your cortisol, that it is activating your fight or flight. It is making you stressed out often more than you need to be instead of serving you. So one of the things I do is seek out forms of media that do not do that to me. So a great example on Instagram, for instance, is founded by our friend Jenna Lee, Smart Her News, which is Smart HER News. It's a just the facts, ma'am situation. Jenna's a veteran news person who says, like, here's the 3 or 4 things you need to know about today. Here's my email with 5 or 6 things that are happening this week. And you get to be informed without being freaked out. Okay.
Right.
So I think that's really important. And that doesn't always, that rarely happens on Twitter. Let me just say that. It rarely happens in a social media
I would
algorithm.
actually say it never happens on Twitter.
Yeah.
Not even rarely.
Yeah, it's very, very hard to find. So podcasts are another version that that I like to go to because it's more, I'm taking in information, but it's passive. I can be folding laundry at the same time. I can be doing things. I can be out for a walk. I regularly listen to the commentary podcast. I know the daily New York Times one, or the Daily Wire update can be good for people just to give you a, here's what's going on. I host my own podcast called Getting Hammered, which tries to be sort of lighthearted, even when things are crazy out there. But that is a form, I think, that can be calmer than just doom scrolling, as they call it. So I think it's wise to set limits on yourself for those things. And I do it to myself, even at the expense of being completely on the second, fully informed, which technically I guess is my job. But if I lose my mental health and touch with reality while doing that, then I'm not serving anybody.
Right. Well, so you've got the media and the role that it plays and where you can get your news from, right? And could not agree with you more. I don't think there is any other platform outside of Jenna Lee Smarter News that just puts the facts out there. Yeah. And she does such a beautiful job of it. But I also think outside of that, you have 2 candidates that right now are saying if the other one wins, it is a threat to democracy. Right. Like they have both said that. And those are big words and they're big statements. And, take everybody else out of it. Like this is what our presidential candidates are saying. Like it is a threat to democracy if the other one wins. So that in itself can get your blood pressure going and can make you feel a certain way. And so when you want to kind of take a step back and be like, all right, it's not all doom and gloom, but then the candidates are saying that, like, how do you process and deal with that,
Well, one thing is that I don't want to discount the fact that there are real concerns, right? People are hurting pretty bad right now, and they're having trouble affording things. They are unable to buy houses. Like there's real pain. And I think there's also some existential pain from the sort of doom loop that we're in, where even though some might have great prosperity in their lives, but they're not feeling like they have that. Right. And one of the reasons is that you might be a little too plugged into this kind of news cycle, right? But there are real concerns, right? On both sides. I have genuine concerns about what the economy looks like and what the debt concerns look like, because no one's ever interested in fixing that problem, and it will eventually come back to bite us. I have real concerns about Trump's and Harris's intentions or inability to express their policy preferences, right? Perhaps a lack of knowledge about policy preferences at times, right? I have genuine concerns, and I think it's okay to have those. Like it's not like we're just gliding through this and everybody's goofing around and trying to upsell this election. It is important.
Yeah.
And there are two very different views offered for what the country might look like moving forward. So it's okay to think that's important. One thing I might suggest is that Senate races, House races, local races, which I know you've been involved with before, can often have more impact on your daily life and might be a little less insane to engage with. I would also say that doing something on the ground for a campaign might make you feel a little better about politics and democracy in general, whether it's phone banking or door knocking. Look, it's sort of, or election watching, like volunteer to be one of the folks
I
at the
always
polls.
say, when people say, not to cut you off, but like when
Mhm.
people say to me, I want to get involved, I say, go be a poll watcher.
Yes.
Because I think that is the greatest way for you to get engaged and understand how elections work. And you don't have to take a side. You're just like, I'm watching the polls. And you kind of see this day unfold, which is truly it's extraordinary when you are at a poll from the time it opens to the time it closes, and you're there when those machines break down and you watch the votes being counted. It's an extraordinary process.
Well, and it's also sort of I'm going to not incentivize you to do it by saying it's sort of a thankless job, right?
Yeah.
There are people who make this stuff work, who are really important to the system. And but when you join with them, what you find out is like often whichever side they're on, they're just like sweet dorks. Like if I may flatter myself, I'm a little bit of one too, where like they're just kind of into the process and want to make sure it goes well, and they're not out to get you. So I think the difference for me is evaluating sort of political leaders who can be really cynical and bad versus the further down you get to individual citizens, they'll make you feel better about the process often than the top. And like that in and of itself is a problem, but gravitate toward where you're getting a more positive feeling, where you're getting a better feeling about engaging with your fellow citizens. And so those are some of the things that I suggest. I think in fact a lot of these Senate and House races will look much less apocalyptic and much more normal in their messaging
Yeah.
than the top of the ticket will look. So if you'd like to engage in that, sometimes it will feel more like throwback to how we used to do politics.
Listen, I was a elected supervisor of my town for 12 years, and it is as grassroots as they come. It is knocking on doors, telling people about yourself. It is taking care of roads and bridges, understanding how the safety of your town. And like you said, the decisions that are made at the local level have so much more of an impact in your day-to-day life than anything else. And, they're largely forgotten in a presidential campaign. And especially one as big as this one.
Right.
And, I don't think it's hyperbole when we say like, this is probably one of the most important elections in our lifetime.
Well, just on the weirdness factor, right? Just on the unorthodox nature of now both candidates, you can't really avoid that part of it. And it's also very compressed, which means you're going to be getting a lot more information very quickly.
Yeah.
And for a lot of Americans, they don't tune into politics even in a presidential election year until Labor Day and past.
Yeah.
Right. So I'm watching every day as this narrative builds to Labor Day, but other people aren't really doing that. What's gonna happen this year is there's gonna be a real crash course when everybody gets to Labor Day because you have a brand new candidate in the race. Trump has a VP and JD Vance that people don't know very well. Harris is somewhat unvetted because she's never been through a primary outside of the month or two that she ran before the Iowa caucuses in 2020 and then dropped out. So she hasn't been through this. Her VP will not have been through the sort of national stage moment. And a lot of stuff is going to get dropped really quickly. You may have noticed that Shapiro, who I don't know exactly when this is going to come out, but we may have new news about the Pennsylvania governor by the time this podcast comes out. But Josh Shapiro has had a bunch of oppo dumped on him in the past couple of days because it all had to happen right away. There are people behind the scenes going, well, we don't want him to be the VP pick, and we therefore have to destroy him with the 18 stories we have right now.
Yeah. And
that may happen to several other people as well.
Yes. So, so interesting when, for me being a Pennsylvania resident and knowing the weight that Pennsylvania holds in the presidential election. And, the first thing when Harris became the nominee, I was like, Shapiro. I called it, not like it was some big, everybody else called it too, but I was like, Shapiro, he is our governor. He's a Democrat, but he is very, very well liked. Whatever the op-eds say, he is very well liked on both sides. He's doing a great job. He's tough on crime. He's doing a good job as governor. And so, yeah.
That is very powerful. It's an inducement to a ticket for sure. And generally, like, I think the conventional wisdom is that vice presidential picks don't end up mattering that much, even for trying to pull a state. But if one were going to matter, it would be on this compressed timeline in the state of Pennsylvania.
Yes, right. Well, and the other thing that I find very interesting, and you talk about, like, it's not until everything's going to be real rushed once we get to Labor Day, and it's going to be this crash course. The one thing I'm finding when I try to look at this very objectively from both sides, and it gets back to, this being more about ideology than policy, is like, neither candidate is talking about policy. Like, they're just not discussing it. And I don't know. I mean, I feel like I'm pretty in tune and I follow things in the right way. But when I'm listening to, like, our Senate candidates, like when I'm watching commercials, we're already getting mailers, it's policy. When I'm watching at the national stage, our presidential nominees, they're not talking about policy at all. And it's so interesting to me.
So there was an interesting moment in the, there were many interesting moments in the Biden-Trump debate in June, but one that struck me was that they were both asked about childcare costs.
Oh, yeah.
Which for so many people is such a huge deal, including me. It's a huge part of the economy. It's a huge part of how families function. And it is really, really tough out there, right? So they were both asked this question and they both decide to talk about something completely different. Like, and I can't even remember what it was.
I think that's where the golf conversation took place.
It might have been for several minutes each. Yeah. And then Biden finally, like, circled back and said something about tax credits, but it was very minimal, right? And I just thought, the number of people who really have problems paying for childcare who would like to hear a real answer to this is large. Yeah. And you know where those people are? They're in the demo, which is suburban educated women outside of major cities, places like where you live, Ryan. We are the demo that they should be talking to us. But that inability to engage with policy prevents them from doing so. Now, Trump is not interested in policy. He has sort of gut feelings and he has a general direction, but he's not a person who is wed to policy, as you might have noticed from his rhetoric on the abortion and choice issue, which has moderated considerably the platform of the Republican Party to the point that a lot of pro-life activists are pretty upset about it. And then Harris, for her part, and I think this might be basically unprecedented in the modern era, right now does not have an issues section on her website. So there's not even anywhere to click where you might find things that sort of give you the outline of what she wants to do. Now, you could say, okay, well, she's probably sort of a continuation of the Biden administration. I'm not sure that's the message she wants to give, but that is the assumption.
Right.
Nonetheless, both of these camps should be engaging in that in a better way. And one of the things I think that we lose is when people at high levels don't talk about policy and are incapable of engaging in the details of it. Everyone else loses practice talking about policy and being engaged in the details of it. The reason I got into politics is because I like policy ideas. And it feels so very long ago because there was a time when on cable news you actually talked about tax plans
Yeah.
and you talked about healthcare plans. But that's very different now. And it's sort of a chicken and the egg thing, where is it the politicians that are the issue, or is it that American voters don't really want to hear that stuff? I think if you lead from the top and you talk more about that stuff, people are going to get used to hearing it more and they're going to want to hear more of it.
Yeah. Well, I think it also sets an understanding for when you're in a conversation with someone, you say, well, listen, I'm voting this way because I believe in X, Y, and Z. But when the candidates aren't even talking about it, and again, you have a general idea, but like when it's just ideas and it's not, this is what I'm going to do.
Right.
It's very hard. And, you know, I just had, not too long ago, I had Pete Hegseth on the podcast, and I asked him, and I found it so interesting because I tried to talk to him about, again, kind of who we are at the Travis Manion Foundation and community. And we come together from all different socioeconomic backgrounds and, you know, we all want to accomplish the same thing, which is to build better communities, to serve our communities, to mentor our youth. And we do that without fail. And very similar, like I always say, that the military is perhaps one of our greatest social experiments, where you have all of these different people coming together to accomplish a similar goal. And they take politics out of it. It's not, I mean, I don't know if it's illegal, but like you can't be political in uniform. You can't.
Right.
And so as a result of that, they put that all aside and they accomplish the mission, right? I get the real world doesn't work like that, but I was having this conversation with him about, do you see a way that there is a way we can come together? And his answer was, no, I'm not trying to come together. Like, I'm trying to convince you that my side is the side you should be on. And I just found it so interesting. And then I actually went on to ask him, I said, do you have any friends that are liberal? And he like paused for a moment and he was like, I used to, but I don't anymore. And I found that so wildly interesting that he said, where we are now today in our country, I don't feel that I can have true friendships with people that aren't conservative Republicans.
Yeah, I think a lot of people feel betrayed by leadership and by decisions made in policy. Like I, for instance, still pretty ticked off about a lot of COVID stuff, including closing the schools for 18 months. And yeah, there are people, not my fellow, no, actually my fellow citizens, they weren't my friends, but people in my community who yelled at people who wanted schools open and called us grandma killers and said we were the worst of the worst. And you know, they were wrong. They were wrong on the facts. And they treated people badly. Now, I try to reserve my grudge for people who are actually on the school board and were making those decisions as opposed to just neighbors and stuff. But I think we've gone through a period of time, and I use COVID because it's so viscerally really turned neighbor against neighbor in a very real way, as in I will call the police if I see you gathering with more than 10 people. I think that was incredibly damaging for our social fabric. I think a lot of people feel betrayed on both sides because, right, if you were somebody whose neighbor was gathering outside and you thought that was unsafe and it might cause your family to die, which again, we're getting back to the apocalyptic messaging, which wasn't helpful from public health, then you're going to get really ticked off about that. And you're going to say that tribe wants me to be hurt. And the other side of the tribe is going to say, you don't want my kids to go to school or have therapy in person or be able to go to funerals,
Right.
right? And you're keeping me from going to church. That ticked me off pretty bad, right? So I think there are very real reasons, and that's just one of the policy sets that happened in. There are a lot of reasons for people to have turned against each other, and some of it's reasonable. Some of those grudges are very reasonable.
Yeah.
And so it is hard to maintain friendships if you end up on two sides of those tribes and you feel like you've betrayed each other on either side.
Well, okay. And I agree with you 100%. But my question to you is, who caused that? Like, who's at fault that, because the neighbor to neighbor fighting is not, you fighting with your neighbor over COVID policies, that came from somewhere else, right? So
Yeah.
who's to blame? Let me put it that way.
I don't know. There's a long list of people. And I don't want to say it's just that part of policy either, right? Like
No,
I'm
but I'm
friends.
saying just in general, like
Yeah,
you look at these kind of clashes, because what I thought was so interesting when I was talking with Pete, he said, I used to. And so
right.
if he had said to me, no, I'm never going to be friends with a liberal, that's okay. But when he said, I used to, but not
Yeah.
anymore, I was like, what changed? Like, what changed?
Well, okay, so I will give you this, and to your liberal listeners who are no doubt open-minded and wise people, there's a lot of study that shows that it is conservatives who have more ideological cross-partisan friendships than liberals do. And I don't know exactly why that is, but I have experienced in my own life and in being in sort of like hyper progressive circles, as in campus, campus environments, right? That there is this amplified view that breaking bread with you, someone who disagrees me, is actually like, it's totally out of bounds. I can't be for you. I'm soiled by being near you if you believe anything right of center, right? And I think a lot of right-leaning people have a lot of practice hearing liberal viewpoints. It's like the majority of the news they hear, right? The majority of the news outlets. They have a lot of experience watching bands and loving bands with people who have different views from them and enjoying them anyway. Movie stars, like have I ever seen a movie with someone who believes what I believe in it? I don't know. Like maybe Vince Vaughn is sort of libertarian. There's like three of them, right? Uh, so I think there's a practice to that where you get used to encountering that. You get used to encountering that. And it is less so on the other side. There's less practice in the sort of general culture, unless you are, by the way, like I was, a conservative in a liberal town. You might be a liberal in a conservative town. And so you're totally used to hearing all these views. But I think hearing each other's views and being able to put yourself in someone else's shoes is actually like what creates an environment where you don't have to turn off the spigot as soon as you find out someone disagrees with you. And as far as converting people, right? I'm in the business of communicating and convincing. That's what I do. But I've always told college students who are invariably left of me that, hey, when you have a conversation with someone on the other side of the aisle, maybe don't make your thought process, I'm going to convert you,
Right.
because that feels transactional to them. It feels disingenuous. And by the way, look, no hate on the street preachers, but I'm just saying, like, you end up the street preacher of politics, right? If you're just shouting at somebody to change their mind, and it doesn't end up being that convincing.
Yeah.
So the way you engage and the way that you encounter different viewpoints matters. And so like that is a bit of a counterintuitive data point that is real, that surprises often liberals. But it is I think it's happened over a generation or so that it has become on the left more problematic to engage with people on the right. Now, this is also spreading to people on the right. Like people look at me and go, you're a sellout because you worked at CNN. You're a sellout because you go to college campuses. And I say, I go those places so that people can hear a different point of view, because I think that's important. And I think that's part of convincing them. If you do not show up ever, no one's going to listen to you. You earn the right to be heard, right? So, but that doesn't mean it's either side's specific fault. I just think that's a very interesting civic data point that shows up quite a bit.
So how do you have a conversation, or how would you have a conversation with somebody that thinks that you're the enemy because of where you fall politically? Like, how do you have that conversation? Or do you just, it's like, do you just agree to disagree and not, let's say you have a friend and,
Right.
and I always say, like, I have friends that are super, super, super liberal and super,
Right.
super conservative. And I don't know why it's not hard for me to have conversations with them. And maybe it's because I have that close of a personal relationship with them that we can have these conversations. But I feel like I can have those conversations with people about these types of things. But I feel like people more and more are scared to and feel like they can't.
Yeah, no, it can be scary. I tell college students all the time that the price for them engaging is much higher than it was for me. When I was a college student, yeah, I was a weirdo because I was right of center and I was young, but but I felt like I could engage without fear of being canceled, basically. That wasn't really an issue. I didn't have social media when I was in college, so I got to have training wheels for that kind of thing and actually engage in things that you're supposed to engage in on college campuses. On this front, by the way, Harvard just added a question to their admissions process that is it's an essay question that says, tell me about a time when you uh, seriously disagreed with someone and how you approached that disagreement. And I think this is a very small step in the right direction, because right now, colleges in general are not, especially elite colleges, I shouldn't say all colleges, not really in the business of being inquiring about other points of view, right? It tends to get very cancelly very fast. And I've watched that evolution over 10 or 15 years. I used to go to college campuses and like sort of orphaned conservatives would come and talk to me after an event and say like, oh, it's so nice to hear somebody who agrees with me on a couple things. Now I get sort of run-of-the-mill liberals who feel like they can't be progressive enough to fit in, and they're afraid to say just very normal, even left of center things on campus. So that can be really toxic. And so I'm glad to see Harvard sort of taking a very small step to maybe
Yeah.
welcome people who are good at talking to their friends. One thing, so Guy Benson and I, who's also a Fox News contributor, wrote a book called End of Discussion. And in that book, I believe we suggested, and we do it in our book talks, it's about talking to other people. It's about not messing up our opportunity to engage in these ways. If you have somebody who has interesting views that you're not sure about and you want to know more about them, like be curious about them. It doesn't have to be like, I'm going to convert you or you're going to convert me. It could be like, I don't understand your point of view on that. You must have grown up differently and learned different things than I did. Please, can you tell me about them? Like that could just be it.
Yeah.
Um, and then we always said, maybe there's just an article that you'd like to exchange with this person, right? Let's not go, we don't have to do book club together, but let's just an article, maybe a longer magazine piece on some issue. Sometimes it's better to start with something economic that it's not maybe quite so pitched as as like abortion policy, right? But pick something like energy or economics and trade a magazine piece, and then say you'll talk about it for 20 minutes without questioning the other one's motives.
Yeah.
And that just means saying, my friend who I'm having a conversation with doesn't want the worst for the world. My friend would like good things for people. My friend has a different way of coming to that conclusion. And I think, look, I'm often going to think someone's mistaken, particularly on economics, about the ways they want to help other people. That's why I got into this business, because I think the free market is by far one of the most empowering things and brought the most people out of poverty in the history of mankind, and we should like preserve it. However, it ain't perfect, and I can hear other points of view. And even if I think you are incorrect, that's okay.
Yeah.
I don't have to be converted, but I can hear you.
Well, I think that's the thing. People don't hear each other anymore, right? I think at the end of the day, people just aren't hearing each other.
Yeah.
I think people are so stuck in on their side that they're not even willing to hear. But then I also think that that may just be kind of this picture that we're not seeing is, like you say, the mass majority of people in the middle that are willing to hear and talk and have these conversations. Right. But those aren't the things that you're seeing, right? So I think as polarizing as things look, and I mean, there's no denying it, it is probably one of the most polarizing times in our history. I still believe that the mass majority of our society falls in a place where you can have healthy conversation and debate and talk about issues in a real way.
Yeah.
But you've
Well,
almost go ahead.
it takes practice and it takes trust.
Yeah.
And one of the things I think that's unfortunate about social media is that it can really ruin that trust, because you're not sure if you're texting somebody and they're going to sort of like screenshot you and put it somewhere else, or so I think, but between friends and between acquaintances who you're trying to get to know better, there's a lot to be said. There's a lot of power in not assuming the worst of the person who's sitting across from you.
Yeah.
Right. And that will make them more willing to talk. It makes you more willing to talk. And then, fostering that trust as you move forward. But again, there are super fans on both sides. And I don't even think that, like, I'm not one of them, but I don't even think those people are, I'm not going to assume the worst of those people either.
Right.
I disagree with them. I think they're wrong. Sometimes I think they're deeply wrong. Right. And sometimes I think the conclusions they come to are very bad and might be very bad for me. Right. And so I understand people's concerns and I'm not discounting them. But generally, if you're at a diner and you're sitting across from a person in your community, like, you should be able to just have a conversation, recognize your blind spots, understand that you're not going to understand and have seen everything that this person has seen, and maybe give them a moment to explain to you how they got there. But again, like, there's a lot of communication these days sort of in the zeitgeist that is very assumes the worst of people, and then sort of tends to weaponize too much having these conversations and turning them into sort of personal attacks.
Yeah.
And to the extent that you can make an agreement not to do that with somebody, it can lead you in the right direction. But it gets harder and harder. It really does.
So a little bit of practice might be what all of us need to be doing on some level.
This is my message. And then I'm also like, but don't get canceled, right?
Practice, but don't get canceled. There you go. I like that. Well,
no, it's like, yeah, we have to be, this is a day. I want to be realistic about the fact that it is a thing that people feel they need to be cautious about. But pushing back on that feeling that you have to self-censor is actually part of what makes people healthier. Like, the free exchange of ideas is uncomfortable. That's sort of the nature of it. But the more we do it and the more information is flying back and forth, the better chance we come to a correct conclusion. Censorship does not get you there. Self-censorship does not get you there. And I know I harp on COVID, but I think COVID is a good example of that, where there was like an attempt to sort of put guardrails on everything that ended up getting you to not great conclusions because it excluded other people's thinking from these policy decisions.
No, I think it's again, I think the case study of COVID will be studied for decades and decades to come. Yeah. I mean, it's super interesting. Well, I would also say, like, we talked a little bit about mental health and what that means, like, how, knowing this is the Resilient Life podcast, how do you stay resilient during these challenging times, right? Like, over the next, let's see, we've got 1, 2, 3.5 months roughly. Like, what are you doing? What are you personally doing to stay resilient with who knows what else is going to be thrown at us?
Yeah, I'm going to lecture myself right now because I've gotten off course, but I was doing the Bible in a Year podcast. So that was helping me just sort of be grounded in the morning. And have I completely lost track of that over the last 3 weeks? So yes, I need to get back on that because it does give me perspective in the morning, right? Like to just do that and think like, oh, there's a much bigger picture here
Right.
than whatever's coming into my phone right this second. I think it's wise to set limits on your social media. I try to, I'm not great at doing that, but I'm giving myself a pep talk as well as you guys. I I try to take care of my family and make sure that sort of our path, regardless of political outcomes, is leading like that we have guardrails, right? That's makes me feel better about the larger picture. Sometimes that means just unplugging and hanging out with them because that is a better use of my time than fighting in the salt mines of Twitter on a daily basis,
You do
right?
a funny job of it, though, I will say.
I
I mean,
I try to keep it
you keep it
not
light.
insane.
Yeah.
Um and then yeah, what else? Yeah, just attempting not to get drawn so far in that I become I don't know, too angry. I don't want to be too angry, right? That doesn't make me a good communicator. It doesn't make me a good mom. It doesn't make me a great wife, right? I want to keep my head, and that means exposing myself to people who are calm about these things, who are not apocalyptic about these things. I tend to be an optimistic person, but a cynic about like the elites in our country. That's sort of I'm a weird combination where I'm very skeptical of the job that everyone's doing, but I'm an optimistic person.
Yeah.
So if that's your jam, you can follow me. But yeah, and find people who calmly give you some facts so that you do not feel overwhelmed all the time.
Yeah. And I think the social media part, I actually just looked at a study this morning of and this even outside of politics, the detrimental effects of the quick dopamine hits that social media, especially like Reels and TikToks give you.
Yeah.
And when that's compounded by political Reels and TikToks, that only amplifies those hits in a positive or negative way. But like you can get off and, all reality has gone out the window. And so I am very guilty. And the one thing that I'm going to practice doing, I'm very guilty of when my alarm goes off, I roll over and I grab my phone.
Yeah.
Open it up because I want to know what's going on. Like, what did I miss in the 7 or 8 hours that I've been sleeping? And
Right.
during these times, there have been some big things, where I wake up and I'm like, holy crap. And so I am going to check myself and not do that anymore. And I set a boundary for myself that I am not going to look at social media for the first hour of being awake. And just that, again, gets back to that kind of grounding yourself to, reality, what the day looks like, how you're going to move forward in this day in a good way. Listen, I can't say I'm not going to check social media throughout the day. It's inevitable.
Oh no.
But I am not going to start my day with dopamine hits that are not good for me and things that are just so polarizing, like right away. That's the first thing that's entering your brain.
Yeah, I think that's wise. And I try myself, and that's the reason for the morning Bible study and in a best case scenario. And then I think an important part of being resilient in general is to focus on things you can control, right? Which is why I say maybe when it comes to politics, doing something on the ground
Yeah.
is maybe what you want to do instead of obsessing about a news cycle that maybe you cannot control, right? That the thing that might give you that might feel edifying to you would be to actually do a thing that is making a difference on your side of the aisle in whatever race it is for a person that you think might make your life marginally better, right? And who has policies that you agree with. Handling things that you can control and keeping that universe like sort of tamed is a really important part of resilience for all of life.
Always well said. Again, doesn't matter what we're talking about, grief, politics, anything else under the sun, you always offer such great perspective. And I think this was great. And this is exactly what I wanted to get out of this episode for people to have understanding of, again, how they navigate through these political tides, because I think it's a lot harder for people than any of us understand. And I know for me, you know, when I feel that I'm pretty in tune to this, and I'm going to bed going, oh my God, I don't even know how I'm going to get through the next 3 months and what this is going to look like. And I'm like, I just got to talk about this. I think that we need to have a discussion about it. And you know, you were obviously the first person I thought of. And graciously, I texted you and you said, let's do it. So, MK, thanks for always coming on and offering us just great insight about whatever we're talking about.
I try my best. It's a sprint, and the maybe a catchphrase for the end of this election is just the only way out is through, man. We got to get to the other
That
side.
is the only way out is through. Just keep going. Keep your head down. Thanks, MK.
Thank you.